Hello, I'm Jason MINK, and welcome to the Old Guys Who Like Old Comics Spotlight. And today, we're going to talk about how the Human Torch deserved better. Oh sure, he didn't have it nearly as bad as perpetual hard luck cases like SpiderMan or Daredevil. In spite of his strange and dangerous powers, the Torch wasn't publicly feared like the Hulk or his own teammate, Ben Grimm, aka The Thing. Instead, Johnny Storm had led a life of relative comfort, sponging off his sister and brother-in-law and living a life of comparative ease in the technological wonderland that was the Baxter Building. His problems were laughable. Issues with girls or his own self-confidence certain Westchester mutants would have eaten their yellow and blue togs to have. And while writers have attempted to give the Torch more depth over the years, the character is ultimately pigeonholed in the modern age due to his association with his family/team that brought him to the metaphorical dance, the Fantastic Four. But this was never part of the plan. The first Human Torch appeared in October of 1939 in the pages of the aptly named Marvel Comics No. 1. Created by Carl Burgos and published by Timely Comics, the original Torch had a number of distinctive differences to set him apart from his latter-day predecessor. For a start, in spite of his name, the first Human Torch was in fact an android. Created by the more or less mad scientist, Professor Phineas Horton, the man-like synthetic creation had the unexpected side effect of bursting into flame when coming into contact with oxygen. Initially, this made the character a public menace, but as the title progressed, the android learned to control his combustive power. The Torch quickly adapted to his surroundings and soon spent his downtime in the guise of beat cop Jim Hammond. The Torch was an unqualified success for Timely, already on a spree with their other characters Captain America and Namor the Submariner. These three characters would lead Timely's success at the newsstand, but with the end of the Second World War, the public's interest in larger-than-life heroes quickly waned. The character took his bows in the pages of Marvel Mystery Comics No. 92 in June of 1949, and after a brief revival in 1954, the Torch's flame was seemingly snuffed for good. But then, a funny thing happened. The superhero trend that had seemed so stale by the end of the 1940s was reinvigorated in the early 1960s, thanks in no small part to the advent of Marvel Comics. Not simply Timely under a different name or a pale clone of then No. 1 comics publisher DC, those new Marvel comics featured flawed, oftentimes antisocial characters whose lives were only complicated by their weird abilities. There was the angry, brutish Hulk, the off-puttingly occult Doctor Strange, and the grimed web marionette Spider-Man. For all that, it was Marvel's first foray back into the world of superheroics that seemed to cement the company's reputation for out-of-the-box comic storytelling, and that comic was the Fantastic Four. Released in November of 1961, the Fantastic Four featured not one, but a quartet of enigmatic characters for readers to enjoy. In brief, an accidental exposure to cosmic rays beyond the Van Allen belt leaves four intrepid astronauts alive but forever changed. There is the group's leader and scientific genius, Dr. Reed Richards, whose uncanny ability to stretch his newly pliable body is limited only by his prodigious imagination. Alongside of Reed is his girlfriend, Susan Storm, who develops the remarkable ability to turn invisible and project force fields. Piloting the rocket that took them to the stars is Ben Grimm, who gains not only monstrous strength, but a hideous new appearance to match. These were all new characters, or at least different enough that folks might not notice, but it was the fourth member of this cosmic combo who broke the rule. In the Human Torch's heyday, Stanley Lieber was a mere gopher and copyist at Timely Comics. By the early 1960s, Lieber, now calling himself Stan Lee, was the company's publisher and head writer. Working with longtime timely artist and vanguard of the Marvel style of comic storytelling Jack Kirby, Lee set about bringing the torch back into the limelight. He would be the fourth member of this fantastic new team, but not without a few changes. Android Jim Hammond would stay deactivated, at least for the time being. This new torch was human, a hot-headed young kid, closer in spirit and attitude to the latest generation of children reading comics. Brother to Susan and perpetual thorn in the side of Ben Grimm, the Torch was a character in which the audience might see themselves. Reckless, impulsive, but always with Big Brother Ben to bail him out, it seemed a safe bet that the kid would be the team's breakout star. And while Johnny did begin to headline his own adventures in the pages of Strange Tales, the spark never quite caught as it had with the FF. Even the introduction of Ben into these solo tales couldn't keep the Torch's head above water, and his spot in Strange Tales was soon given over to crusty old Nick Fury. To quote the aforementioned Mr. Grimm, "What a revolting development!" The Torch stayed pretty close to home for the rest of the 1960s. The character would occasionally appear alongside Spider-Man, and while these interactions were entertaining, they served to underscore what was a critical problem for old Johnny. He couldn't seem to carry an adventure on his own. His appearances in early issues of Marvel Team-Up seemed random, with no direction or end goal. And while the title's other lead, Spidey himself, seemed to mesh effortlessly with any character he co-starred with, the Torch remained one-dimensional, a brash, flirty hothead with no real development in his 10-plus years of existence. And this is where I come in. Born in 1970, I was ground zero for comics' Bronze Age. By 1976, I was a full-on Marvel zombie, thanks to the influence of my peers and the endlessly exciting adventures published every week by the House of Ideas. And while I learned to read early, it was unquestionably the visual aspect that first attracted me to comics. Much like today's kids are riveted by the minutiae of Pokemon cards or whatever the hell is popular this week, the world of comics exerted an almost unhealthy pull over me. I couldn't help but be drawn to these brightly colored representations of a wider, wilder world, and few characters had the visual impact on me as the Human Torch. When it comes right down to it, a man engulfed head to toe in flames should be a terrifying image, and perhaps to some it is, but to young Mink it was incredibly compelling. The Torch's visual was kinetic, consistent yet ever-changing, sheathed in an elemental force of both offensive and defensive means. Yes, Thor may have been stronger, Quicksilver was faster, but the Torch looked cooler, and that's what mattered to my still developing priorities. Where was his comic? From this kid's standpoint, the Torch should have been a lock. Johnny had a distinctive image, a great catchphrase, and a power set to match mostly anyone he come into conflict with. To me, he should have been an A-lister like Spider-Man or Captain America, and for a while, Marvel marketed him like one. Now, Torch memorabilia was pretty scanty in the 1960s. Oh sure, he'd turn up alongside his other teammates on t-shirts, buttons, posters, and the like, but merch featuring the Torch as a solo player was limited to this Marvel Flyers paper jet thing. He's joined by non-flying heroes like Captain America and Daredevil, making his inclusion more by necessity than design. Next up, the Torch got his own poster, courtesy of the Merry Marvel Marching Society Superhero Club. These posters were issued in 1966, and it's notable that of the four, it was Johnny who was chosen, and not Ben. Now, the jury is out on who illustrated this image, but if I find out, I'll let you know in the comment section below. Slowly, the Torch made his way onto more Marvel merch. In 1975, he received 2 cards in the first Topps comic book superhero sticker set, with another to follow in the second. These cards were where the character really caught my attention. I was completely taken in by both the visual and the concept. More importantly, the Torch comes off like an adult here. For the first time, he seemed independent of the Richards family unit, and I wanted more. And I got it, in the form of this cool rack stamp toy featuring some of Marvel's biggest B-listers: Hawkeye, Falcon, Vision, and of course, old Matchstick himself. I used to ink these with red, orange, and yellow markers and stamp them everywhere. If you grew up near a 7-Eleven, then you may remember the Marvel Slurpee cups of the 1970s. Here's Johnny's, including 2 views of the back. The Torch received the ultimate endorsement in 1975, getting his own Mego action figure. Well, technically he came in a wave with the other 3 members of the team, but each character received unique box art, giving them distinctive identities at retail. While I had a lot of Megos as a kid, somehow I missed out on the Torch. My cousin had him. Then again, my cousin had all of them. Lucky son of a... Anytime my family paid him a visit, I made a beeline right to that toy box. To have a physical, tangible representation of the character previously only experienced in 2 dimensions was a potent experience, and one I remember vividly to this day. And finally, no look at 1970s Marvel merchandise would be complete without a mention of the Marvel World. This cardboard playset you assemble yourself represented a city block featuring New York's most notable superheroes in their headquarters. You get the Daily Bugle, the Sanctum Sanctorum, and of course, the Baxter Building, complete with a cardboardy Torch figure. Now, I had this thing as a kid, and I can tell you it was great. At least until I accidentally crushed it in my closet. It's no wonder these sets go for hundreds of dollars these days. Now, there are a few more odds and ends, but by the end of the 1970s, Marvel seemed to put the brakes on the Human Torch. The Thing or Spider-Woman appeared in his place in advertisements, perhaps a shift towards kid-friendlier characters. Whatever the reason, Johnny vanished once again into the Fantastic Four, never again to be merchandised as his own character, instead simply 1/4 of Marvel's first super team. It's hardly the worst place to be. After all, he's got his hot rods and his little black book of phone numbers and all. Still, I can't help but feel that the Human Torch deserved better. But this is where we came in. For the old guys who like Old Comics Network, I'm Jason Mink. Thanks for watching. If you enjoyed this video, please consider supporting the network. No kidding. Daddy needs a new pair of everything. Oh, and here's a Mexican bootleg Human Torch figure. I don't really have much to say about it, but I figured you should probably see it. You know, just so we're covered.
Woo!